I never thought a simple dinner could turn my life upside down, but that's exactly what happened when Marissa, my wife, and her sister Chloe invited me to that fancy restaurant downtown. It was one of those places with dim lights, overpriced wine, and waiters who act like they're doing you a favor. I figured it was just a night out, maybe a chance to relax after a long week at work. Marissa had been dropping hints about new beginnings all month, and I assumed she meant something small, like redecorating the house or planning a trip. Boy, was I wrong. We sat down, ordered drinks, and they started chatting about how great the place was, how it had good energy. I nodded along, sipping my beer, waiting for the point. Then Marissa leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with excitement, and said, "We've got something big to tell you." Chloe chimed in, pulling out a glossy folder from her bag like it was a treasure map. "It's a luxury wellness retreat," she said, flipping it open to show me sketches of yoga studios, infinity pools, and women lounging with crystals on their foreheads. They wanted to build this paradise for rich ladies who'd pay top dollar to find themselves with imported sea salt scrubs and meditation circles. I thought it sounded ridiculous, another one of their wild ideas that'd fizzle out in a week. But then they hit me with the number, $180,000. That's what they needed from me to get it off the ground. I laughed out loud, thinking it was a joke. The waiter even glanced over, probably wondering what was so funny. But their faces didn't crack. Marissa's smile faded, and Chloe's eyes narrowed like I'd insulted her personally. "This isn't funny," Marissa said, her voice tight. "We're serious." I tried to explain calmly, at first, that we didn't have that kind of money lying around. Sure, I'd saved up a decent chunk over the years, working overtime at the warehouse, cutting corners where I could. But that was our safety net, not some play fund for their daydreams. I told them it wasn't practical, that businesses like this needed more than pretty pictures and good vibes. Chloe slammed the folder shut and leaned across the table, her voice low and sharp. "You're supposed to support us," she said. "This is about family." I shot back that family doesn't mean bankrolling every crazy idea that pops into their heads. Marissa stayed quiet, just staring at me like I'd betrayed her. The air got heavy, and I could feel the other diners sneaking looks at us. I thought that'd be the end of it. Maybe a few days of cold shoulders at home, some guilt trips from Marissa about how I don't believe in her. But then Chloe dropped the bomb. "Fine," she said, standing up and grabbing her purse. "Don't be shocked when our lawyer contacts you." My jaw dropped. A lawyer? For what? I looked at Marissa, waiting for her to say something, anything, to call off her sister's bluff. But she just stood up too, avoiding my eyes, and followed Chloe out the door. I sat there alone, the half-eaten breadbasket mocking me, wondering what just happened. The next week, I found out they weren't kidding. A guy in a cheap suit showed up at our house with a thick envelope court papers. Marissa and Chloe were suing me. My own wife. I tore it open, hand shaking, and read the words. They were coming after me for refusing to give them the money. I couldn't believe it. Marriage was supposed to be a team effort, not a shakedown. I stared at the papers, the legal terms blurring together, and felt this pit in my stomach grow. How did we get here? I thought back to when Marissa and I first met, her laugh, the way she teased me about my terrible cooking. We'd built a life together, or so I thought. Now she was teaming up with her sister to drag me through the mud over some spa fantasy. I tossed the envelope on the kitchen counter and grabbed a beer from the fridge, trying to wrap my head around it. They'd gone too far. I wasn't just mad. I was hurt. But I wasn't about to roll over. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. I picked up my phone and started looking for a lawyer, someone who could shut this nonsense down. Little did I know that dinner was just the beginning of a storm I never saw coming. I couldn't stop staring at that envelope on the kitchen counter. It felt like a grenade with the pin already pulled. The words inside kept spinning in my head, marital and moral neglect resulting in financial hardship and emotional distress. That's what Marissa and Chloe were calling it, like I was some deadbeat husband who'd left them starving on the street. All because I wouldn't fork over $180,000 for their wellness retreat pipe dream. I mean, who sues their own husband for saying no to something that crazy? I ripped the papers open again, trying to make sense of it. They claimed I had a duty to support their business, that my refusal was basically abuse. And then the kicker, they said I'd verbally promised them the money months ago, which was a flat-out lie. I never promised a dime. I sat there, the fridge humming in the background, feeling my whole world tilt. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was personal. My own wife was trying to paint me as the bad guy in a court of law. I barely slept that night, just kept pacing the house, wondering how Marissa could do this to me. By morning, I knew I needed help, someone who could fight this insanity. I spent hours on the phone, calling around, until I found Camille Reyes. Her name popped up in some online reviews. People called her a bulldog, a lawyer who didn't just win cases but made the other side regret ever stepping into a courtroom. I liked the sound of that. When I met her at her office, she didn't waste time with small talk. She was tall, sharp-eyed, with a handshake that could crush a walnut. I handed her the lawsuit papers, and she skimmed them, her lips curling into a smirk. "This is gold," she said, tapping the page with a pen. "They're suing you for being selfish?" "Oh, we're going to have fun with this." I told her everything: the dinner, the $180,000 demand, how Chloe threatened me with a lawyer that night. Camille listened, nodding, jotting notes on a legal pad. When I mentioned the fake promise they'd written into the lawsuit, her eyes lit up. "That's perjury if we can prove it," she said. "And we will." I felt a flicker of hope, like maybe I wasn't as screwed as I thought. She leaned back in her chair, sizing me up. "Here's the deal," she said. "They're banking on you caving, paying up to avoid the hassle. But I don't play defense. We're going to hit back hard, dig up every dirty little secret they've got, and turn this into their nightmare." I liked her already. She didn't sugarcoat it, didn't promise me the moon, just told me she'd fight like hell. I signed the retainer right there, handing over a chunk of my savings to cover her fees. It stung, but it was better than letting Marissa and Chloe bleed me dry. The next few days were a blur. Camille got to work, filing a response to their lawsuit, denying every claim they'd made. She called me one afternoon, her voice crackling with energy. "They've got no evidence of this so-called promise," she said. "No texts, no emails, nothing. They're bluffing, and it's sloppy." I asked her what our next move was, and she didn't hesitate. "We go on offense," she said. "I'm subpoenaing their financial records, bank statements, credit card bills, anything they've touched in the last 5 years. If they're bold enough to sue you, they're dumb enough to leave a trail." I couldn't help but grin. For the first time since that dinner, I felt like I had a shot. But then I went home, and reality hit me again. Marissa was still there, living in our house like nothing had changed. She'd cook dinner, watch TV, even ask me how my day was, all while her name was on a lawsuit trying to ruin me. I couldn't stand it. "How can you do this?" I finally snapped one night, standing in the kitchen while she chopped vegetables like it was just another Tuesday. She didn't even look up. "It's not personal," she said, cool as ice. "It's about what's fair." Fair? I wanted to yell, to shake some sense into her, but I just walked away. Talking to her was like arguing with a brick wall. I started sleeping in the guest room, locking the door at night, not because I thought she'd do anything crazy, but because I didn't trust her anymore. Camille was right. They were counting on me to give in, to hand over the cash to keep the peace. But I wasn't that guy. I'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let them take it all away with some made-up story. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the silence of the house, I made a promise to myself. I'd fight this to the end, no matter what it took. Marissa and Chloe had no idea what they'd started, but they were about to find out. I couldn't believe what I was holding in my hands when Camille called me into her office a week later. She'd subpoenaed Marissa and Chloe's financial records, and the stack of papers she slid across her desk was like a bomb waiting to go off. "Take a look," she said, her voice calm but with a glint in her eye that told me she'd found something big. I flipped through the pages, bank statements, credit card bills, Venmo transactions, and my stomach twisted. These weren't the records of two women scraping by, desperate for a business to save them. This was a treasure map of reckless spending, and I was the fool who'd been too blind to see it. Tens of thousands of dollars gone, blown on stuff I couldn't even wrap my head around. Crystals, $12,000 worth, shipped from some boutique in Sedona. First-class tickets to spa retreats in California and Florida, racking up another $8,000. Designer robes, custom yoga mats, a $50,000 photo shoot in Santorini with some brand alignment guru who probably charged by the Instagram like. I sat there, jaw clenched, feeling the heat rise in my chest. They weren't entrepreneurs, they were spoiled kids playing dress-up with money they didn't have. And a lot of it was on credit cards I didn't even know about. I looked up at Camille, trying to keep my voice steady. "How did I miss this?" I asked. She shrugged, leaning back in her chair. "You trusted your wife," she said. "That's not a crime. But this." She tapped the stack. "This is our ammunition." I kept digging through the papers, each line item making me angrier. There was a $3,000 charge for healing sound bowls, and another $6,000 for a vision board retreat in Bali. I remembered Marissa mentioning a girl's trip last year. She'd said it was a cheap getaway with Chloe, paid for with her own savings. Savings? What a joke. She didn't have savings. She had debt and a husband too dumb to check the fine print. I felt sick, not just because of the money, but because of the lies. How long had this been going on? How many nights had I come home from work, tired and sweaty, while they were out there living like queens on borrowed cash? Camille watched me process it all, then leaned forward. There's more, she said, pulling out a single sheet from the pile. It was an email chain between Chloe and some guy named Vince, a business associate from years back. She'd partnered with him on a boutique clothing line that tanked. Apparently, she'd taken their startup cash, spent it on a trip to Paris, and then ghosted him when he demanded answers. Vince had kept receipts, screenshots, even a voice memo of Chloe laughing him off. This is gold, Camille said again, grinning now. She's got a history of screwing people over, and we've got proof. I nodded, still reeling. It wasn't just about Marissa anymore. Chloe was the ringleader, and my wife was her loyal sidekick. I thought back to all the times Chloe had crashed at our place, whining about her latest failed gig, how she just needed one big break. I'd felt sorry for her, even tossed her a few bucks here and there. Now I saw it clear as day. She wasn't broke, she was a leech. And Marissa? She'd gone along with it, probably because Chloe made it sound so glamorous. I pushed the papers back to Camille, my hands shaking a little. What do we do with this? I asked. She didn't hesitate. We bury them, she said. This isn't just defense anymore. It's a counterattack. We show the judge they're not victims, they're grifters. No business plan, no licenses, just a shopping spree with your name on the bill. I liked the sound of that, but part of me still couldn't believe it had come to this. I'd married Marissa because I loved her, her smile, her quirks, the way she'd hum off-key in the shower. Now she was sitting across from me in a courtroom, pretending I'd ruined her life by saying no. I drove home that night, the city lights blurring past, and felt this weight settle on me. The house was quiet when I walked in. Marissa was out, probably with Chloe, plotting their next move. I didn't even care anymore. I grabbed a beer and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wall. Those financial records weren't just numbers. They were a story of betrayal, laid out in black and white. I thought about confronting Marissa, throwing it all in her face, but what was the point? She'd just twist it, cry, make me the bad guy again. No, this was bigger than a fight at home. This was war, and Camille was my general. I took a long sip, letting the cold burn down my throat, and made up my mind. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. I'd let the truth do the talking. Whatever happened next, I wasn't backing down, not after seeing what they'd done with my trust. I woke up the morning of the court date with a knot in my stomach, like I'd swallowed a rock that wouldn't budge. It was the first time I'd seen Marissa and Chloe face to face since the lawsuit hit, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Tears, glares, or more of their fake victim act. I put on my best shirt, the one Marissa always said made me look sharp, and drove to the courthouse with Camille's voice in my head. Stay calm. Let me handle the fireworks. The building was cold and gray, all concrete and echoes, and when I walked into courtroom 5B, I saw them. Marissa and Chloe, sitting at the plaintiff's table, dressed like they were heading to a fashion shoot instead of a legal fight. Marissa had on a cream blazer, her hair swept back, and Chloe was in a sleek black dress, tapping her nails on the table. They didn't even look at me as I took my seat next to Camille, just stared straight ahead, whispering to their lawyer, this wiry guy with a cheap tie and a loud voice. The judge came in, a tired-looking man with glasses perched on his nose, and banged his gavel to start things off. Their lawyer went first, standing up like he was auditioning for a movie role. He launched into this sob story about how Marissa and Chloe were visionary women crushed by my selfish refusal to support their dreams. He said I'd promised them the money, $180,000, during a heartfelt family meeting that never happened, and how my neglect had left them broke and broken. I wanted to laugh, but my fists clenched under the table instead. The judge listened, scribbling notes, his face giving nothing away. Then it was Camille's turn. She stood up slow, smoothing her jacket, and I swear the air shifted. She didn't yell or wave her arms. She just started talking, quiet and steady, like she was explaining something to a kid. Your Honor, she said, my client isn't a miser or a monster. He's a man who said no to a bad idea. And these two. She nodded at Marissa and Chloe. They're not victims, they're opportunists. She walked over to the evidence table and picked up the stack of financial records we'd dug up. "Let's talk facts," she said, holding up the first page. $12,000 on crystals, $8,000 on spot trips. A $50,000 photo shoot in Santorini. No business plan, no permits, no proof they've ever run anything but a tab. The judge raised an eyebrow, and I saw Chloe shift in her seat. Camille kept going, laying out every ridiculous purchase like she was reading a grocery list. Marissa stared at her hands, her face turning pink, but Chloe just smirked, like she thought she could charm her way out of it. Then Camille dropped the hammer. "Your Honor, they're not struggling, they're strategizing a scam. And we've got more." She nodded at me, and I took a deep breath. This was my moment. I stood up, my voice a little shaky at first. "I have a witness," I said, loud enough for the room to hear. The judge looked up, curious, and I turned toward the back doors. They swung open, and in walked Talia Brooks, Chloe's old business partner. She was tall, elegant, with dark hair pulled back tight and a look on her face that said she'd been waiting for this day. I tracked her down after Camille found that email from Vince, the guy Chloe had screwed over years ago. Talia was another victim, and when I called her, she didn't hesitate. "I'll be there," she'd said, her voice hard. "That woman doesn't get to keep doing this." As she walked to the stand, the room went dead quiet. Marissa whispered something to Chloe, who shook her head fast, her smirk gone. Their lawyer jumped up, objecting, saying Talia wasn't on the witness list, but Camille was ready. "She's a rebuttal witness," she said coolly, handing the judge a motion she'd filed that morning. He waved it off and told Talia to take the oath. I sat back down, my heart pounding, watching her settle in. She didn't look at me or Camille. She stared straight at Chloe, and I could feel the temperature drop. The judge asked her to state her name and connection to the case. "Talia Brooks," she said, clear and firm. "I used to work with Chloe Bennett on a business venture until she ran it into the ground and left me with nothing." Chloe's face went white, and Marissa gripped the table like she might fall off her chair. Their lawyer scribbled notes, looking panicked, but it was too late. Talia was here, and she had a story to tell. I glanced at Camille, who gave me a small nod. We'd planned this, bring in someone they couldn't deny, someone who'd seen Chloe's tricks up close. I didn't know exactly what Talia would say next, but I knew it'd be the truth, and that was enough. For the first time all day, I felt like I was winning not just the case, but the right to say I wasn't the villain here. The judge leaned forward, ready to listen, and I settled in, waiting for the fireworks to start. I couldn't take my eyes off Talia as she sat there on the witness stand, her voice steady and her gaze locked on Chloe like a laser. The courtroom felt smaller somehow, the air thick with tension, and I could tell Marissa and Chloe were squirming. Talia didn't waste time. She started right in, telling the judge how she'd met Chloe 5 years ago at a networking event for small business owners. They'd hit it off, decided to launch a boutique skincare line together, something natural and high-end. "I put in $20,000 of my own money," Talia said, her tone flat but edged with old anger. Chloe promised to match it, said she had investors lined up. She didn't. I leaned forward, hanging on every word. Talia explained how they'd opened a joint account for the business, how she'd trusted Chloe to handle the books because she was good with numbers. Big mistake. Within months, the money started disappearing first in small chunks, then in big ones. "I'd check the balance and see withdrawals I didn't authorize," Talia said. $5,000 here, $3,000 there. When I asked her about it, she'd say it was for marketing or samples. But then I found the receipts. Camille stepped up then, smooth as ever, and handed Talia a folder. She opened it and pulled out a stack of papers, bank statements, credit card charges, even a photo. "This is what she spent it on," Talia said, holding up a receipt for a $4,000 Louis Vuitton bag. Luxury handbags, private chefs for her parties, a weekend in New York at some five-star hotel. None of it was for the business. The judge peered over his glasses, taking the evidence as Camille passed it to him. I glanced at Chloe. She looked like she might bolt, her hands twisting in her lap. Marissa whispered something to her, sharp and fast, but Chloe just shook her head. Talia kept going, her voice rising a little now. When I confronted her, she laughed, said I was overreacting, that I didn't get how business worked. Then she drained the last $10,000 from our account and blocked my number. I never saw a penny back. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I felt this mix of relief and rage bubbling up. Relief that someone else knew Chloe's game. Rage that she'd pulled it on me too. with Marissa's help. Camille took over, asking Talia questions to nail it down. Did Ms. Bennett ever provide a business plan or proof of those investors? She asked. No, Talia said. Just promises. And after she took the money, did she ever contact you again? Not once, Talia replied. I had to shut everything down, lost my investment, my credit took a hit. She didn't care. The judge nodded, scribbling more notes, and I could see their lawyer sweating, flipping through his papers like he'd find a magic loophole. Then Chloe lost it. She shot up from her seat, pointing at Talia. She's lying, she yelled, her voice cracking. She's just bitter because she couldn't keep up with me. The judge banged his gavel hard, the sound echoing off the walls. Sit down, Ms. Bennett, he said, his tone ice cold. One more outburst, and you'll be removed from my courtroom. Chloe sank back down, her face red, and Marissa grabbed her arm, whispering something fierce. I couldn't hear it, but I didn't need to. Their whole act was falling apart. Camille handed over more evidence, emails from Chloe to Talia, full of excuses and dodge questions, plus texts where Chloe bragged about a new purse while Talia begged for updates on their business. There was even a photo Talia had dug up from Chloe's old Instagram, her posing with a stack of cash and a caption, "Hustle pays off." The date matched one of the withdrawals. The judge flipped through it all, his expression getting grimmer by the page. I sat there, my heart pounding, watching Talia finish her story. I just wanted to build something, she said, quieter now. She took that from me. Camille thanked her, and Talia stepped down, walking past me with a small nod. I mouthed a thank you back. She didn't have to do this, but she did, and it changed everything. Their lawyer tried to cross-examine her, asking if she'd mismanaged funds too, but Talia shut him down fast. I've got my records, she said. Where are Chloe's? He didn't have an answer. The judge called a break after that, and I followed Camille out to the hallway. That was brutal, I said, still processing it. She smirked, sipping from a water bottle. That was the appetizer, she replied. Wait till they see the main course. I didn't know what she meant yet, but I trusted her. Talia had just blown a hole through their story. Chloe wasn't some misunderstood dreamer. She was a scam artist, and Marissa was in too deep to pretend otherwise. I looked back through the courtroom doors, catching a glimpse of them huddled with their lawyer, heads bent low. They thought they could bully me into paying up, but now the truth was out, and it was ugly. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just defending myself, I was winning. I walked back into courtroom 5B after the break feeling like the tide had finally turned, but I wasn't prepared for how fast things would spiral. Talia's testimony had left a crack in Marissa and Chloe's story, and Camille was ready to pry it wide open. The judge settled in, adjusting his glasses, and called the session back to order. Camille stood up again, her voice smooth but sharp, like a knife sliding through butter. Your Honor, she said, Ms. Brooks gave us a glimpse of the plaintiff's pattern. Now let's see the full picture. She started laying out more evidence, those financial records we'd dug up, but with a twist. She pulled out a chart sheet had made, big and bold, showing every dollar Marissa and Chloe had blown through in the last 2 years. It wasn't just the crystals and spa trips anymore. She had bank statements showing overdraft fees, bounce checks, even a loan application they'd tried to push through with my name on it. I sat there, stunned, as she pointed to the screen. This was denied, she said, tapping the loan doc, because my client never signed it. They forged a signature. The judge leaned forward, squinting at the paper she handed him, and I felt my chest tighten. They tried to steal from me straight-up fraud, and I hadn't even known. Marissa wouldn't look at me, her head down, but Chloe glared like she could burn a hole through the table. Camille didn't stop there. She brought up a letter they'd submitted in discovery, one they claimed I'd written, promising them the $180,000. This is fake too, she said, holding up a side-by-side with my real signature from our mortgage docs. Sloppy work, Your Honor. They didn't even try to match the handwriting. The judge took it, his lips pressing into a thin line. I could feel the room shift. Their lawyer scribbled notes, looking desperate, but it was like watching a guy try to bail out a sinking boat with a spoon. Then the real chaos hit. Marissa suddenly turned to Chloe, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. You said she'd never find us again, she hissed, her eyes wild. Chloe snapped back. You were the one who lied to your husband about the money. It was like a bomb went off. The judge banged his gavel, shouting, order. But they kept going, their words tumbling over each other. You told me he'd cave. Chloe yelled. You said we could fake the letter. Marissa shot back. Their lawyer jumped up, trying to shush them, But it was too late. The whole courtroom heard it. I sat there, jaw dropped, watching my wife and her sister turn on each other like rabid dogs. The judge slammed his gavel again, harder this time. Enough, he roared. We're taking a recess. Counselors, get your clients under control. He stormed off the bench, and the room erupted into murmurs. I followed Camille out to the hallway, my head spinning. What just happened? I asked, still hearing their voices echoing in my ears. She grinned, leaning against the wall. They imploded, she said. Couldn't handle the pressure. One of them will flip, guaranteed. I didn't know what she meant by flip, but I could see it. Marissa and Chloe were crumbling, and they'd done it to themselves. We stood there, watching through the glass doors as they kept at it, arguing in the courtroom even after the judge left. Marissa was crying now, mascara streaking down her face, while Chloe waved her arms, yelling something I couldn't make out. Their lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. People milled around us, other lawyers, clerks, random folks waiting for their cases, and I caught a few staring, whispering about the crazy sisters. I felt exposed, like my dirty laundry was flapping in the wind, but at the same time, I didn't care. They brought this on themselves. I thought back to that dinner, how smug they'd been, thinking they could scare me into paying up. Now here they were, tearing each other apart in front of a judge. Camille pulled out her phone, scrolling through emails. This is better than I hoped, she said, almost to herself. They just admitted to forgery on the record. We've got them dead to rights. I nodded, still processing it. Part of me wanted to feel bad for Marissa. She looked so small, so lost. But then I remembered the fake loan, the lies, the way she'd sat there at home acting like everything was fine. No, she didn't get a pass. The recess dragged on, and I paced the hallway, replaying their outburst in my mind. You said he'd cave. That's what Chloe had shouted. They'd planned this whole thing, betting I'd fold under the pressure. I stopped pacing and leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. I'd spent years building a life with Marissa, working hard, saving up, thinking we were a team. Now I saw it clear. She'd been playing me, and Chloe was the puppet master. When we went back in, the judge looked fed up, his patience gone. Marissa and Chloe were quieter now, sitting apart, their lawyer whispering furiously between them. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew one thing. Their little show had just handed us the win. I glanced at Camille, who gave me a thumbs up. Whatever happened, we were ready. I walked into the courtroom the next day expecting more fireworks, but something felt off the moment I sat down. Chloe's chair was empty. Her lawyer, that wiry guy with the cheap tie, stood up as soon as the judge took the bench, looking nervous, his voice shaky. Your Honor, he said, my client, Chloe Bennett, has withdrawn from the cases of this morning. I'll no longer be representing her. The judge raised an eyebrow, glancing at the empty spot next to Marissa, who sat there staring at her hands like she'd lost her best friend. I shot a look at Camille, who just shrugged, her face unreadable. Noted, the judge said, scribbling something down. We'll proceed with Ms. Marissa Bennett as the sole plaintiff. I leaned over to Camille and whispered, What you playing at? She smirked, keeping her voice low. She's running scared. Yesterday cracked her. She knows we've got too much. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Chloe bailing wasn't the end of it. The day started slow. Their lawyer tried to salvage things, arguing that Marissa still deserved the money because I'd emotionally abandoned her by refusing to fund the retreat. It was weaker than yesterday's sob story, and the judge barely looked up from his notes. Camille didn't even break a sweat tearing it apart, pointing out the forged letter and fake loan again, reminding everyone Chloe wasn't there to defend her part in it. Marissa kept her head down, not saying a word, and I wondered if she'd given up too. Then, just before closing arguments, the doors swung open, and everything changed. Chloe walked in, not alone, but flanked by two cops, her hands behind her back. She wasn't smirking anymore. Her face was pale, her hair messy, like she'd been dragged out of bed. The courtroom went dead silent, and I felt my pulse kick up. The judge sat up straight, peering over his glasses. What's this? He demanded. One of the officers stepped forward, holding a paper. Your Honor, we have a warrant for Chloe Bennett's arrest, charges of fraud, embezzlement, and perjury, issued this morning based on evidence from this case and prior complaints. My jaw dropped. Camille grabbed my arm under the table, whispering, Talia. It hit me. Those records Talia brought, the voice memos, the receipts. She must have taken them to the cops after yesterday, and they'd moved fast. Chloe didn't fight as the cops led her to a side bench, but she turned to Marissa and screamed, You said he'd never fight back. Her voice echoed, raw and desperate. Marissa flinched, covering her face with her hands, while their lawyer sank into his chair like he wanted to vanish. The judge banged his gavel, shouting for order, but I barely heard it. I just sat there, arms folded, watching Chloe get cuffed right in front of me. It was surreal. My sister-in-law, the one who'd strutted into that restaurant like she owned the world, now a mess in handcuffs. The judge called a recess to sort this out, and Camille pulled me into the hallway, her eyes gleaming. "This is it," she said. "Chloe's done, and Marissa's got nothing left. We've won." I nodded, still dazed. "How'd the cops get involved so fast?" I asked. She grinned. "Talia's testimony yesterday wasn't just for us. She filed a formal complaint last night, handed over everything to the DA. They matched it with our evidence and boom, warrant issued." I let out a long breath, leaning against the wall. It felt good, but weird too, like winning a game I never wanted to play. Back inside, the judge returned and dismissed Chloe's arrest as a separate matter, letting the case against Marissa wrap up. Their lawyer gave a half-hearted closing, mumbling about misunderstandings, but it was over. Camille stood up, calm and lethal, summing it all up: the lies, the fraud, the spending spree, Chloe's meltdown yesterday. "My client didn't neglect anyone," she said. "He protected himself from a scheme, and the evidence in Ms. Bennett's arrest proves it." The judge didn't take long. He ruled in my favor, tossing the lawsuit out, and ordered Marissa to pay my legal fees. She didn't react, just sat there, staring at the table as Chloe was led out by the cops, still yelling about how it wasn't her fault. I watched her go, feeling this strange mix of relief and emptiness. In the hallway after, Camille clapped me on the shoulder. "You're free," she said. "They're the ones in the hole now." I nodded, but my mind was on Marissa. She'd walked out alone, no Chloe, no lawyer, just a woman who'd bet everything and lost. I didn't feel sorry for her, not after the forgery, the lies, but I couldn't help wondering where she'd go from here. I drove home that night, the city quiet around me, and sat in the driveway for a while. The house felt different now, emptier. I'd won, sure, but it didn't feel like a victory parade. It was just done, and that was enough for now. I was still buzzing from the courtroom when Marissa texted me the next day, asking to meet. "Can we talk?" "Just us," she wrote, and I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let her stew in the mess she'd made, but another part was curious. What could she possibly say after all that? I typed back, "Fine. Coffee shop on 3rd, 2 p.m., and hit send before I could overthink it. When I got there, she was already at a corner table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. No blazer, no makeup, just jeans and a hoodie, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She didn't smile when I sat down, just pushed a cup of black coffee toward me. "I got your usual," she said, her voice soft, like she was testing the waters. I took it but didn't drink, leaning back in my chair. "What's this about, Marissa?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. She fiddled with her napkin, tearing little pieces off the edge, and for a second, I thought she might cry. Then she looked up, her eyes meeting mine, and said, "Let's put this behind us." I couldn't help it. I laughed, loud enough that the barista glanced over. "Put it behind us?" I said, shaking my head. "You sued me. You and Chloe tried to ruin me over some spa fantasy. This isn't a fight over who forgot to take out the trash." Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. "I know I messed up," she said. "But it wasn't all me. Chloe pushed me into it. I didn't want to hurt you." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but she just kept going, her words spilling out like she'd rehearsed them. "She made it sound so easy," she said. "Like you'd see how much it meant to us and just help." But then it got out of hand, and I couldn't stop her. I took a sip of the coffee, mostly to give myself a second to think. It was bitter, just like this whole conversation. "You couldn't stop her?" I said, setting the cup down hard. "You signed the lawsuit, Marissa. You sat in that courtroom while she lied about me. Don't act like you were just along for the ride." She flinched, tearing the napkin into smaller bits. "I'm not saying I'm innocent," she said. "But Chloe, she's the one who knew how to twist things. And Daniel helped her." I frowned, leaning forward. "Daniel? Who's Daniel?" She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder, sliding it across the table. "Her ex," she said. "From college. He's the one who taught her how to fake financials, set up the offshore stuff. I didn't know about him until it was too late." I opened the folder, my hands steady but my mind racing. Inside were printouts, bank statements, wire transfers, emails between Chloe and some guy named Daniel Carter. One showed a $10,000 transfer to an account in the Cayman Islands. Another had Chloe asking him how to make it look legit for a loan. There were even notes about using stolen identities to open credit lines. I looked up at her, my voice low. "You've had this the whole time?" She shook her head fast. "No, I found it last night. After the arrest, I went through her laptop. She left it at my place. She's been lying to me too, saying it was all under control. But it's bigger than us, and I'm scared." I closed the folder, my mind spinning. This wasn't just about the lawsuit anymore. Chloe had been running a full-on con, and Marissa had either been too dumb or too greedy to see it. "Why give this to me?" I asked, tapping the papers. "Why not take it to the cops yourself?" She swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the cafe. "Because I want out," she said. "I'll give it to them, but I needed you to know first. I owe you that much." I sat back, studying her. She looked genuine, scared, broken. Not the Marissa who'd sat across from me in court with her chin up. But trust? That was long gone. "This doesn't fix anything," I said, my voice cold. "You still chose her over me." She nodded, tears welling up but not falling. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm sorry. I didn't say anything, just pushed the folder back to her." "Take it to the police," I said. "Tell them everything. That's your mess to clean up." She took it, her hands trembling, and stood up. "I will," she said, then paused. "For what it's worth, I didn't mean for it to end like this." I watched her walk out, the bell above the door jingling as she left. I sat there for a while, the coffee going cold, trying to figure out how I felt. Relief, maybe, knowing Chloe's web was bigger than I'd thought, but no forgiveness. Marissa could say sorry all she wanted. It didn't erase the months of lies, the nights I'd spent wondering how my marriage turned into a battlefield. I drove home, the folder's contents stuck in my head. Daniel, offshore accounts, fake IDs. This was federal-level stuff now. I called Camille from the car, told her what Marissa gave me. "Smart move, not keeping it," she said. "Let Marissa hand it over. She's the one who needs to dig herself out." I agreed, but as I pulled into the driveway, I couldn't shake the image of Marissa's face, that flicker of regret. It didn't change anything, but it lingered. I didn't sleep much that night after meeting Marissa at the coffee shop. The folder she'd handed me kept flashing in my mind. All those papers proving Chloe's schemes went way deeper than I'd imagined. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd missed it all. Not just Chloe's con, but Marissa's part in it. How she'd let herself get sucked in. How she'd turned on me instead of walking away. By morning, I decided I was done wondering. She'd given me the evidence, said she'd take it to the cops, and that was her problem now. I wasn't her cleanup crew. I called Camille anyway, just to keep her in the loop. Marissa dropped a bomb yesterday. I told her over the phone, pacing my kitchen. Files on Chloe, offshore accounts, fake loans, some guy named Daniel pulling strings. Camille didn't miss a beat. "Good," she said. "I'll fax it to the feds today. They're already sniffing around after Chloe's arrest. This'll light a fire." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Marissa said she'd turn it in herself," I added. "Think she will?" Camille snorted. "Maybe, but I'm not waiting on her. The FBI doesn't mess around with stuff like this. Wire fraud, identity theft. Chloe's toast, and anyone tied to her is going down too." I hung up, feeling a strange calm settle in. The lawsuit was over, Chloe was in cuffs, and now the feds were taking over. It was out of my hands, and for once, that felt right. A few days later, Camille called back with an update. "It's official," she said, her voice crackling with excitement. "Full investigation launched. Chloe's operation is bigger than we thought. Shell companies, tax evasion, the works." Marissa turned in the folder, and they've got agents chasing leads across 3 states. I sat on my couch, letting that sink in. "What about Marissa?" I asked. "She in trouble too?" Camille paused. "Not clear yet," she said. "If she's smart, she'll cooperate fully. Might get her a deal. But she's not off the hook." I didn't say much after that, just thanked her and hung up. Part of me wanted Marissa to pay, to feel the weight of what she'd done, but another part just wanted her gone from my life for good. A week later, I heard she'd skipped town. A buddy of mine, Tom, who works at the hardware store, mentioned seeing her loading up a rental car with suitcases. "Looked like she was in a hurry," he said over beers one night. "Heard she's heading to Arizona, something about starting over as a yoga teacher, or some crap." I rolled my eyes, taking a swig. "Figures," I said. "She's still chasing fairy tales." Arizona, spiritual healer, sounded like Marissa, running from the mess instead of facing it. I didn't care enough to check if it was true. Then Chloe's boyfriend, or ex, I guess, tried stirring things up. I got a voicemail one night, some guy with a gravelly voice saying, "You think you're safe? I've got dirt on you, man. I'll expose you." I played it twice, trying to place him, but it was all hot air. Expose me for what? Saying no to a scam? I called Camille about it, just to be safe. "Ignore it," she said. "He's got nothing, probably just mad his girl's locked up. If he calls again, we'll slap him with harassment." I deleted the message and forgot about it. The guy never followed through. Big talk, no backbone. As the weeks went on, the feds kept digging. I saw Chloe's name pop up in the news one day, local woman linked to multi-state fraud ring. The article said they'd seized her accounts, frozen her assets, and were tracking down this Daniel guy. Marissa wasn't mentioned, which made me think she'd cut a deal, spilled everything to save herself. Smart move, if she did. I didn't feel bad for Chloe. She'd build her own cage, brick by brick. One night, I was flipping through channels and caught a clip of her being perp-walked into a federal courthouse, head down, orange jumpsuit clashing with her bleach blonde hair. The reporter said she was facing 20 years if convicted. I turned off the TV, not needing to see more. That chapter was closed. I started focusing on my own life again. Work, friends, the house. I sold Marissa's old yoga mats at a garage sale, chucked her crystals in the trash. The place felt lighter without her stuff cluttering it up. Tom came over one weekend, helped me repaint the living room, and we cracked jokes about how I dodged a bullet. "You're a free man now," he said, slapping paint on the wall. "No more crazy in-laws." I laughed, and it felt good, real, not forced. The feds didn't need me anymore. Camille said they had enough to bury Chloe without my testimony. I was glad to stay out of it. The last loose end was that voicemail, but it faded into nothing, just noise from a guy who didn't matter. I stood in my driveway one evening, the sun dipping low. I took a deep breath. The air smelled clean, like a storm had passed. I'd kept my savings, my name, my peace. That was the real win. I woke up one morning a few months later to the sound of birds chirping outside my window, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel that knot in my gut. The lawsuit, the courtroom drama, Chloe's arrest, Marissa's disappearing act, it all felt like a bad dream that was finally fading. I got out of bed, made coffee, and stood in the kitchen, looking around at the house I'd fought to keep. It was mine again, not a battleground, and that was worth more than I could put into words. Life had settled into something quiet, something normal, and I was okay with that. Work picked up at the warehouse, steady shifts, good pay, no surprises. I'd always liked the routine of it, the way I could clock in, haul boxes, and clock out without anyone asking me for $180,000 or dragging me to court. My buddies there, like Tom, kept things light. We'd grab beers after shifts sometimes, shoot the breeze about football or dumb stuff we'd seen online. Nobody brought up Marissa or Chloe anymore. They didn't need to. It was old news, and I was glad to let it stay that way. One day, I got a call from Camille, just checking in. "Heard anything from the ex?" she asked, her voice casual but with that sharp edge she never lost. "Nope," I said, leaning against my truck outside the warehouse. "She's gone silent, probably still in Arizona pretending she's a guru or something." Camille laughed. "Good riddance," she said. Chloe's sentencing came through. By the way, 12 years, federal prison. No parole for at least 8. I whistled low. "That's a long time," I said. "Long enough," she replied. "She's got no one to scam in there. You're officially in the clear." I thanked her again, couldn't say it enough. Really. She'd saved my ass, turned a nightmare into a win, and I'd never forget it. After we hung up, I sat there for a minute, letting it sink in. 12 years. Chloe had built her whole life on quick cash and big lies, and now she was paying for it. I didn't feel sorry for her, not after everything, but I didn't feel happy either. It was just done. Marissa never reached out again, and I didn't expect her to. No apology. No, I was wrong. Nothing. I'd half thought she might try, maybe send a letter or show up at the house with more tears and excuses, but she didn't. Tom's story about her running off to Arizona stuck with me, and I figured that was her way out. Start fresh. Act like none of this happened. Fine by me. I didn't need her words to move on. I already had. The house got a facelift over those months. I painted the walls, ripped out the old carpet she'd picked, put in hardwood I'd always wanted. I sold off her leftover junk, those yoga mats, some weird candles she'd hoarded, and used the cash to buy a new grill. Tom and a few guys came over one weekend, and we broke it in with burgers and beers, laughing about nothing important. The backyard felt alive again, not haunted by her presence. I started sleeping better too. No more pacing the halls. No more waking up to check if she'd snuck in to grab something. The guest room went back to being a guest room, not my hideout. One night, I was flipping through the mail and found a check from the court, Marissa's payment for my legal fees, like the judge ordered. It wasn't much, barely covered half of what I'd paid Camille, but I cashed it anyway. Felt like a small trophy, proof I'd come out on top. I stuck it in my savings, right where the $180,000 still sat, untouched by their greedy hands. That was the real victory, keeping what I'd earned, not letting them take it. The news about Chloe died down after the sentencing. No more headlines, no more updates from Camille. The feds had their win, and I had my life back. I heard a rumor from Tom that Marissa's spiritual healer gig wasn't panning out. Some lady at his store said she'd seen her working at a juice bar in Tucson, looking tired. I didn't care enough to dig into it. She'd made her bed, same as Chloe. Me? I kept things simple. Work, friends, a cold beer on the porch at night. I'd learned my lesson about trust, about watching for red flags. Marissa and Chloe had taught me that much. Give people enough rope, and they'll hang themselves every time. I didn't need to fight them to win. I just had to stand my ground and let the truth do the rest. One evening, I sat outside as the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and pink. The neighborhood was quiet, just kids playing down the street and a dog barking somewhere. I cracked open a beer, took a sip, and let out a long breath. This was peace, the best kind, the kind you earn. My savings were safe, my name was clean, and I'd watched their whole scheme collapse from the front row. They'd tried to break me, but I was still here, still whole. That was enough.